My name's David Fitzgerald-Irons, and I'm here to introduce to you somebody who I'm sure many of you will already have heard the keynote on Wednesday, but I will go through this regardless, and in particular, of course, today's topic. Dr. Quentin Stafford-Fraser is going to talk to us about Exbiblio, subtitled Paper Renaissance. And just a little excerpt from the abstract. There's now a gulf between electronic documents and paper ones, each type good for some purposes and not so good for others. We need different tools for each. Despite the limitations of print and continuing predictions of paper's demise, and haven't we all heard that before, we produce more of it now than ever. It doesn't look as if either type of document is going to go away in the near future. Dr. Stafford-Fraser will talk about the ideas which led to Exbiblio, a Seattle-based startup which is developing technology to endow paper documents with some of the power of their electronic counterparts and bridge the gap between the two. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of bio detail which I managed to pick up from Wikipedia. You're actually being addressed today by James Quentin Stafford-Fraser, who was instrumental in the creation of the Trojan Room coffee pot, which I imagine you may have heard something about, being the first webcam. He wrote the X-Coffee client program, which allowed the state of the coffee pot to be displayed on a screen. Quentin studied computer science at the University of Cambridge and is credited with operating the first web server in the University of Cambridge in 1992 and with working on the interactive whiteboard project at Xerox Europark in Cambridge. Quentin wrote the original VNC client viewer and server, and the geeks among us will know what that is. It's a tool which is beloved of hackers, both black hat and white hat the world over. So we have a fellow feeling with Dr. Stafford-Fraser on this. And the server for the Windows operating system while at the Olivetti Research Laboratory. More recently, he was co-founder of Newnham Research, now DisplayLink, and Exbiblio. Quentin is co-founder of the Indio project and is currently its managing director. And with that, please, Dr. Quentin Stafford-Fraser.
Thank you. Oh, I think you pretty much covered it. Thank you, everyone. The paper renaissance, I called this. Or do you say renaissance or renaissance in the States? Renaissance?
Oh,
say here. Renaissance. Renaissance, good.
This
is good. Okay, so in 1066, William of Normandy, Inc. made a hostile takeover bid for England Limited, and he was successful, much to our distress, and so for about the last 1,000 years, we've been making fun of the French by way of retaliation. But from their point of view, it was a remarkably successful takeover, and the old CEO was dispatched with remarkably little cost, and after all the sort of conquest parties and press releases and things died down, the new CEO, William, got together his team and he said, you know, guys, I think we're going to need to do some reallocation of equity here, probably, to reward the new management team suitably. And we didn't really do enough due diligence before we started this escapade, so we don't really know what we've got. So I think we should start by updating the asset register. And so people from the admin department were dispatched all over the country to find out what there was out there. And in 1086, they produced the first version of their report, which went by several names, but eventually, actually fairly quickly, became known as the Doomsday Book because it was a kind of final judgment on what there was in this country. And it was basically a record of what was out there, who was who, what was what, who owned what, and how much they all owed to the king as a result. And it's really quite a remarkable document. It's a very accurate picture of life at the end of the 11th century. It details all the important buildings, estates, woods, even in some cases down to who owns which field and how many sheep and cows there are in it. It's invaluable to historians. So if we roll forward about 900 years, in 1986, we'd kind of settled down and forgiven the French and decided that this was really rather a grand British achievement, the Doomsday Book, and that the BBC ought to do something to celebrate the 900th anniversary of this thing. And they made some good documentaries. But one of the BBC producers, a guy named Peter Armstrong, thought we should go one better. and produce an updated version of the Doomsday Book. And this they did. It was a mammoth project. They used schools largely to gather the data. They invented new methods of collecting this data, centralizing it. They got paper maps from the Ordnance Survey, high-resolution maps, and had special cameras which would capture them and stitch them together in clever ways. They developed new hardware which would be used to store this. This is a Philips LV-ROM drive based on a 12-inch Laserdisc. It's actually designed to store analog video, and not very much of it. So it basically stores a PAL video signal. But they realized that you could store thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs on this if you stored them essentially as still video frames. And so that was what was done. The audio track was modified so that it could store data. And there was special software written to connect it all up. And you had essentially maps you could zoom in on. There were all sorts of different ways of searching this, but there were maps you could zoom in on, get quite high resolution versions. You could read text about the area you were interested in. You could see photographs. I think that's a Ford Capri. I haven't seen one of those in ages. Anyway, you could see photographs of where you were. And we didn't have mice then, but we did have trackballs. And so you could kind of zoom around and click on things, which was quite a novelty in 1986. The only thing that really didn't work well about this was the sales and marketing afterwards, because this was meant for wide distribution. And unfortunately, the disk and hardware package that they put together ended up costing over £4,000, which was a lot of money back then. And so most of the schools who had contributed to this weren't actually able to afford one. And they reckon something like 1 million people were involved in one way or another in producing this. And a very small proportion of them ever got to see the results. However, in general, it was an impressive achievement, very useful, no doubt, to historians of the future. And it was a good picture of life at the end of the 20th century. So, why am I telling you this? Well, there's a cautionary tale here, and this is often used as an example, so many of you may have heard this before. In 2002, a couple of people, including this guy, Adrian Pierce, realized suddenly that all of this data was about to be lost. And the reason was chiefly that LV-ROM drives were never a big success other than for this project. They were few and far between. The ones that were still around and still working were 16 years old, and their bearings were starting to wear out, and it wouldn't be very long before they wouldn't be able to spin their disks anymore. And the modified BBC micros that were used to drive this stuff were also getting hard to come by. And if someone didn't do something soon, 1 million people's work would vanish. And so there was another project set up to extract all these analog pictures, to try and work out how everything had been connected up 16 years before, and to recreate this stuff in a way that people could read again, which they did. And so now you can just point a browser at a website and it can now be read by anyone. Well, almost anyone. I have to say, if this was my Safari browser, if I ran Mozilla Firefox, it did work. But what makes this a good story is that, as people were fond of pointing out at the time, the original Doomsday Book was still perfectly readable, nearly 1,000 years on. The BBC version was almost completely unreadable 16 years on. This was done on sheepskin using highly abbreviated medieval Latin, but there are a darn sight more people in the world who can read that than can read Philips LV-ROM drives. So there are 2 points here. The first is that having your data in human-readable format is a very, very good idea. Humans tend to repair themselves. They're amongst the only machines that do this, and they even reproduce themselves before their ball bearings wear out. And But my other observation is that the medium that has perhaps proven itself beyond anything else for long-term, reliable, sustainable data storage is sheepskin. So I offer this observation to the entrepreneurs of New Zealand as, with my compliments. So I'm not really going to talk about sheepskin, but I am going to talk about the importance of human-readable data. And I want to talk about the medium that succeeded it, paper. And actually, paper it's been around for a long time. It predated the Doomsday Book by about 1,000 years. It was invented 2,000 years or so ago by a Chinese official named Cai Lun, who made it out of bamboo fibers and mulberry bark. And, but it stayed hidden in the Orient for about 700 years and then gradually sort of moved westward across the world. And the Indians became very good at making it, and the Arabs, and then the Italians. And when it got to Germany in the 15th century, they worked out how to print on it. And then there was a sudden huge boost in demand, because you could distribute much more of this stuff much more quickly. And in the 16th and 17th century, there was the Reformation, and people wanted to print lots of different things on it, like Bibles, for example, to the extent that there was a shortage of the raw materials needed to make paper, which in those days was mostly linen rags. Now, like any new technology, it was, of course, highly controversial. And when Tyndale started translating and printing Bibles, the Vatican took to it about as kindly as the Recording Industry Association of America took to Napster. It was distribution outside their control. And Tyndale, in the end, was burnt at the stake for his part in this, which goes to show, I suppose, that for some technologies there really is a killer app. Even the RIAA didn't go that far with the Napster and Kazaa guys, but I bet they would have liked to. And, but this didn't stop the spread of the technology any more than suing grandmothers and school children stopped the spread of peer-to-peer file sharing. And even the shortage of raw materials was sorted out, because shortly after this, there was a plague that swept across Western Europe, and lots of people died and didn't need their clothes anymore, so rags were abundantly available. And a whole load of new paper mills sprung up until people started to think that it was actually the new rag trade across Britain, particularly, that was spreading the plague, and so all the paper mills shut down again. It's a really interesting history. I just went to look for some dates, and I kind of got caught up in this. But my real point is that over centuries, over millennia, paper has evolved, it's been developed to be essentially the ultimate medium for humans. It's the best output device, that's writing. It's the best input device, that's reading. Storage, we call that filing. And transmission, we call that mailing. And for the vast bulk of human knowledge has been stored in this form, and millions of lives, of businesses, of careers have been built up around the use of paper, the creation of paper, the development of paper, tools that make use of paper. And as we said in the introduction, we had a standard set of tools. If you had a stapler or you had a filing cabinet, it worked with every document, pretty much. Everyone knew how to use this stuff, and I was going to show this little video where we saw this earlier, unless anyone wants to see it again. This was you want to see it again? Okay. This is good. This is the thing Mike showed it at the start.
Broder Ansgar? Ja, der er jeg. Ja, så bra, ok. Ja, hei du. Hei du. Ja. Ja, hva gjelder det? Ja, det er denne her. Ja, vil du sitte? Takk. Ja. Jaha. Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddag, ja. Nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid, altså, skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang, vet du. Ja. Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller? Nei, den bare ligger der. Ok, har du forsøkt å åpne den? Ja, åpne den, altså hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel? Nei, det er sant. Nei. Vil du ha en kopp og en vann? Nei, da, det skal være fort gjort, det skal vi se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn. Ja. Da er du i gang. Ja, altså så langt kom jeg også. Ok. Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte ikke å gå videre. Åja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner at inni her, så ligger det kanskje flere 100 sider med lagret tekst. Så for å komme videre, så tar du tak i et ark, på den måten her, og så liksom blar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der. Jeg blar, altså? Du blar, ja. Men når jeg skal tilbake da? Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen, tar tak der, og så gjør du sånn. Der. Så er vi tilbake til den teksten du hadde, sa. Ikke noe
Ok, så den slutter der, og så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte for dagen, hva gjør jeg da?
Da bare slår du sammen permene
Ja?
på den måten der. Sånn. Da er den lukket, der ligger alt lagret inni der.
Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå,
Nei,
altså.
alt ligger lagret inni her nå.
Ja.
Da må du i tilfelle sette fyr på hele greia. Det er kanskje lite sannsynlig. Så.
Ja, ok. Nei, men for det er noe med det at ikke sant, når du har holdt på med skriftruller,
Ja.
så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk. Ja. Ja, det er på TV-en.
Det er greit.
Ja, flott. Ja, men du, en til før du går. Jeg må bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner
Ja.
sånn,
Ja, riktig.
og så, hva har du kalt det?
Blar.
Jeg blar,
Ja, bla videre.
blar, frem og tilbake.
Ja.
Og når,
Teksten ligger der hele tiden.
ja. Og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den.
Ja,
Flott.
Fint det.
Kjempefint.
Ja, flott det.
Ja, men du, vent, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjen, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den.
Ja, det er fra feil side. Du må åpne fra andre siden.
Så det er ikke likegyldig, det,
Ja,
altså?
du må åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der er den åpen.
Ja vel.
Har du
Ok.
lest manualen, eller?
Manualen?
Jeg skal følge med som manual og så brukerveiledning. Det er sikkert den der. Der, vet du.
Å ja,
I
den,
der
ja.
står alt sammen.
Ja, men ikke sant, der har du samme problemet. Får den ikke opp. Åpnet den.
Ok, det skulle vi kanskje ha tenkt.
I just love that. Of course, the reason that humor works illustrates the difference between paper and electronic systems, right? That people don't have a problem using paper. It's great stuff there. So over 2,000 years, we evolved all these tools, all these ways of dealing with this medium. We understood it, we interacted with it in ways that were very natural and very familiar. And then in the last 20 years, something changed dramatically. In the last kind of 1% of paper's life, the world of documents was split into two. There's a huge gulf now between paper documents and electronic documents. And they're kind of one-way bridges over the gulf. We call them printers. Actually, they're more like sort of cannons. They kind of fire you that way, but you can't get back. And some of our documents live in one world, and some of our documents live in the other world. And we have to use different tools now. One we call a stapler, one we call Adobe Acrobat, or whatever it may be. The way we collect things together is different for them. Paper documents are much nicer to read. They fit in them up. You can fold them up and put them in your pocket. You can throw them across the office at your colleagues, whatever it may be. They've fitted very well into human activity because we've been doing it for 2 millennia. But digital documents have all these other benefits. They're so much easier to copy, to search, to transmit over distances. And actually, this was really brought home to me. I don't know how you buy postage stamps here. This is what they look like at home. We buy a little book of these, and they have a few 12 stamps inside when you buy them. And I realized I don't know how much these cost. And the reason I don't know, they don't print it on them. And the price changes every kind of couple of years or so, and it takes more than 2 years for me to use up 12 stamps. So neither of these document types is about to go away. Okay, both are good at some things and others are good at others. And I've got one of those Sony ebook reader things, which are wonderful devices, but they're trying really hard. They're expensive. They're putting huge amounts of energy to try and make stuff that's as good as paper. And it's only as good as paper in one direction. You can't write on this thing. It has other advantages, but you know, when I get tired of filing things, I long for a paperless office. But when I get tired of computing things, I like to go to bed with a novel, and I don't think either's going to go away soon. But it would be really easy for us to get caught up in the novelty of everything that's happened in the last 20, 25 years, especially since everything is now a document. We used to have applications. We don't have applications now, we have web pages. Everything looks like a document, and so we become more and more aware of the differences between digital documents and paper documents and what paper ones can't do. And it would be so easy for us to rush headlong and embrace the paperless office, the digital library, the e-book, whatever, and forget that 99% of our history of documents has been with paper, and perhaps we shouldn't forget that, and perhaps we should be cautious about embracing too wholeheartedly the last 1% at the expense of the other, or we might forget the lessons of the two doomsday books, for example. So my question is then, can we bridge this chasm? Can we somehow endow paper documents with some, at least, of the characteristics of their digital counterparts so that this gulf isn't so wide, so that we don't feel the limitations so much when we're dealing with paper documents? And so this was why we set up this company called Exbiblio. Now, by way of a disclaimer here, I don't currently have any kind of financial stake in Exbiblio. I'm trying not to advertise this too much. I don't believe in doing that at conferences. I'm telling you about this because I think it's an interesting project, but I may have some financial stake in it at some point in the future, so that's my disclaimer there. So Exbiblio is about trying to bring paper to life, trying to give it some of these things, because in the past, if you wanted to do anything interesting and digital with your paper documents, you would have to scan them. And then you'd have to OCR them. And then you'd have to correct the OCR. And anyone who's done any amount of this knows how quickly it loses its novelty. And this is probably why we sell a lot more printers than scanners in the world. And what you end up with at the end of all this process is an imperfect copy of your paper original. But things are changing. Now, if you're in one of Tara's talks, she said there's no such thing as a eureka moment. Well, there wasn't perhaps a eureka moment for Exbiblio, but there's certainly a eureka process, which we went to. We realized that over the last few years, everything has changed because almost every bit of paper you interact with exists in digital form somewhere. So it may be on your own computer, it may be on your company or your organization's network, it may be publicly available on the web, or it may be somewhere out there that you could get to it if you were willing to pay for it, but it's there somewhere. And so we can use scanning not as a way to create an imperfect copy of our paper document, but to find the perfect digital original. So the question then comes, how much do you need to scan to be able to identify a document uniquely? Can we perhaps just scan one page and then get the whole book, for example? In actual fact, it turns out to be rather better than that. And we had some thoughts and did some experiments about this. One thing we considered was, if you take a square inch or so of a document, that's probably unique to that document. That arrangement of dark and light probably doesn't exist anywhere except in another copy of the same edition of that particular document. But technically, that's a little tricky to search, it would be difficult technology to use that as a way of locating a book, especially given how many different square inch possibilities there are in a given document. And I suppose our eureka moment was when we realized that instead of doing something graphical like that, we could use the text itself. We could actually use a phrase from the text as a key which would identify the document, a kind of barcode which would identify the document. And so I can illustrate this with one of the most powerful and one of the most underused features of Google, so maybe this talk will have been worth coming to if you didn't know this before. So if you take some words like, I traveled to Cambridge on a, which I just extracted from something a little while ago, and you type that into Google, you get back something like 1.5 million documents that have those words in them. But if you put quotation marks around them, which says to the search engine, I want exactly that phrase, I want those words in that order, then you find you get one hit, as of this morning anyway. And that seems kind of unlikely that, of the many billions of documents that Google knows about, there is only one that has the phrase, I traveled to Cambridge on a, but that's the case. Such is the versatility of language, such are the number of variations that actually any one you narrow down will often be a fairly short phrase, will typically be a unique identifier of a document. And it turns out that the number of words you need to identify the document is typically around 6. Now, sometimes if the phrase begins once upon a time, for example, you'll need rather more because there are common phrases that, that occur very many times, but often it's around 6. So now, we're going to do what you should never do. They say you should never do demos with animals, children, or internet connections. Let's give this a go. So that was an inelegant switch here. Oh, I need this over. Okay, so somewhere. Okay, here's a copy of the Dominion, or a bit of the Dominion, which appeared in my hotel room here. And I need a volunteer from the audience. And what I'd like you to do is find one of these articles and read me a line of text from it. Any old one, we'll see how it works. It can start in any word. It doesn't have to be a sentence.
Range of baby gear.
Range of baby gear. Okay. So let's start with range of baby gear. I put it in quotes. And there are 25,000 pages that have range of baby gear in it. But, where's my cursor over here? Including, that's down to 5. And if we say buggies, spell that right, we're down to 3. Now, we may find that we've actually got, that is the same document, essentially, over and over again, I believe. Not quite. Car seats. Okay, so sometimes we need better demos. Sometimes this is why you shouldn't demonstrate it. But how far would we have to go? Okay, this is well done, you picked a really difficult example. Well, we got down to 3 there. We would probably have to go a bit further. Car seats, cots.
But 2 of them are
So 2 of them are the same, and I think if we got as far as beyond carry packs, so that would actually be about 11 words or something. That's quite a long one. Well done, you found a very difficult one. Okay, give me another, let's try it again. The point is it's not very many. I mean, it's less than 2 lines of text, certainly. Mr. BRG said it made sense. Okay, let's have a look at that. That's 1. Did you mean Mr. Bean said it?
Mr. Bean never says anything.
And it's quite fun. Another way you can do this actually is you get someone to, if you don't let them see the screen, you get someone to read you a line and you tell them the next line, and it works. Now, what you often get is you'll type something in and you find that you get no results. But that still proves the point. If I had typed this in and not got 1 but got 0, that would have meant that Google didn't know about that document. But there was nothing else out there which used that 6-word phrase in the billions of documents that Google knows. So there are extreme cases here, and we can talk later how we would deal with, say, that one that we got earlier, if we really wanted to narrow it down to the exact phrase. But that was basically the revelation that we had here. So what can you do with this? This is where I go back to. I've lost my cursor. Ah, there it is. It's off this one. Okay. So our thought was, perhaps, you could make a little scanner that would go on your keyring. And it would capture, this is a mock-up, it would, has sellotape on it, it would capture 5 or 6 words, maybe 10 words, and it would timestamp them. And using that, you could work out what you were reading at what time. If you used it like a highlighter pen, you could highlight anything that you've read anywhere that you thought was interesting or amusing or controversial or that you wanted to pass on to somebody else or that you wanted to keep. And you would end up perhaps with a blog-like list of the things you have read in your life that would be searchable. We'd like to call it a life library. And we thought this could be incredibly valuable. Yes, yes indeed. And I'll show you later that a couple of ways we thought about doing this. So the thing is, this isn't the only thing. When you highlight those words, you're not just identifying the document, you're identifying a particular phrase within that document. We didn't have to choose particular words here, we chose the things that looked interesting or that looked tricky as an example. And so it's a lot like clicking on those words with a mouse. It's a lot like a hypertext link in a web page, and we know all the things you can do with a hypertext link in a web page. And so perhaps this little scanner could be a kind of mouse for paper. Perhaps paper documents, any paper documents, a copy of the Dominion, which has no special barcodes or no special printing processes or whatever, could actually be the start of links to further reference material, links to Wikipedia, links to translations into your language. It could be the starting point of commercial transactions. You could maybe buy a holiday in the place you're reading about. You could buy that book from Amazon. You could do all sorts of things, and it doesn't require any change to the printing and publishing process. My wife is an historian. She has a lot of 17th and 18th century books. They don't have ISBN numbers even. Certainly don't have barcodes. They never will have, but this technique could, in theory, work with that. And that further information that could be produced by the publishers or by someone associated with the publishers, or it could be produced by the community as a whole. So, or some third party. So how are we actually going to do this? Well, we started with a lot of brainstorming. We actually did this in an unusual way, and we filed huge numbers of patents, which I think we filed about 30, and trust me, writing 30 patents is about as much fun as a spell in Guantanamo. And it's, it meant that we could then go and talk about it to anyone, and we could explore these ideas openly with people because we knew that we've got this investment up front. I'm going to do a little diversion and tell you a bit about the company because it's an unusual company in various ways. First thing is this is the office in Seattle, or part of it. The entrance hall is a library, which I think is wonderful. But it's unusual in another way, about which, frankly, I have been very skeptical. This is something my friend Martin, pushed for, and if they can pull it off, it's a wonderful thing, which is that they're doing a .com and a .org at the same time. And the .org is nothing to do with the technology. The .org is basically a foundation doing environmental work. And the idea here is that as you build your company, you should be doing social good at the same time. That the investment into the company should be accompanied by investment into the social good. That if you, well, I'll come back to a little more on that, but this is all given a certain poignancy by the fact my friend Martin has a terminal illness, and we're not quite sure how terminal, but you start thinking quite seriously then about what your legacy is, what you're leaving to the world, whether this company you're building is enough, or whether you want to do something more. And he was very keen to try this, so this is what it's doing. So there's a foundation which is supporting things like the Snow Leopard Trust, and it gives me a chance as well as Tara to put cute kittens on my slides. But it's interesting how this has worked really well, and it's been good for things like recruiting. There have been people who have said, I could have worked for Google, but I actually liked your ethical standard. And if you go to the Exbiblio site, you'll see quite a lot, as much about the foundation almost as you see about the company. There are pictures on the wall around the office of the things they're contributing to. This is snow leopards. There's some stuff about vaccination of, I can't remember the details, but there's health stuff and so on, but it's largely environmental. They are now closing a funding round for the next round of funding for Exbiblio, and written into the statutes of this company is that 15% of it will always be owned by this foundation, with an anti-dilution clause. So new investors have to buy into this as well, and it's quite interesting. Some people, if they're feeling down about their work when they come into the office, they may be motivated by the people who are going to get vaccinations as a result of their success, if the commercial success isn't enough. So that was a little diversion, but it's an interesting company, I think. They have been beavering away very hard trying to make some demos of scanners. So here's a little video clip of... Okay, go ahead. I'll explain this in a sec. So that's just very short, but shows you that there is hardware and it does work. It's a bit bigger than it will be, and I'll come back to that. But it's fast. And one of the key things that these types of scanners have had in the past is they can be really awkward to use. You have to hold them very vertically above the paper or whatever. The idea of this is we want it to be like a highlighter pen. You can kind of wipe it across the page, and you don't have to, especially if you're on a bus or something, you don't have to try and keep this stuff very vertical. So what happened there was this little page popped up, a scan window, which shows the scan in human-readable form. It's found it in our database. And there are various things you can do immediately, like email it to people, post it to your blog, write a comment, give it a tag, and other stuff. And it also ends up in your Life library, which at the moment looks remarkably like a standard Apple app here. But again, you can search that, you can look for tags and so on, you can find out what you're doing. So that's the first stage of this. Here's a little video clip I made some time ago using an inferior scanner that shows you another thing. You can use this basically as a scroll bar.
I'm going to show you how to find any file on your hard disk, any bit of text on your hard disk, without even using the keyboard. I'm going to use one of these scanner devices. Let me show you. I have various files here on my desk which I printed out. They all come from my hard disk, but some of these pages have got muddled up. I don't even remember which files they came from and which pages were from which files. But I can take my scanner and scan a bit of text here. It says automatically identify the document. And you hear that click. That's my computer saying it's recognized the text. It passes it to a search engine which finds the right file, and it opens it up in my word processor and scrolls to the place that I selected.
So that's very useful if you move backwards and forwards. If you're like me, you much prefer reading paper, but then you're always finding things you want to change and you want to jump back to the electronics. Here, not only do you not have to scroll through to find the bit, you don't even have to find the document because the machine can do that for you. So that's an example of the types of things we can do. We wanted, there are scanners like this out there, but they are, as I say, a really nasty experience. And so what we wanted was to produce something that was much nicer, that would eventually be small enough to go on your keychain or something. And this is the current version. And eventually it'll be wireless. At the moment it stores the scans, and when you come and dock it with your PC, they get uploaded. I don't have one here, but it's about the size of this little Apple remote here. Another thing this has, in answer to your question earlier, it's got a voice recorder in it. So you can scan stuff and attach voice notes to it. That's what it looks like inside. But those two applications, as I mentioned earlier, are really just the start. There's a whole range of stuff that you might do once you've identified a bit of information that's of interest. There's stuff that's useful for the user. I think my favorite example is a textbook, actually. If you imagine you're reading a textbook and you come across a bit you don't understand and you scan a bit of it, you might be taken to a Wikipedia article about it. You might be taken to an online chat room where other students who are on the same problem are talking about it. You might be taken to a video of the professor explaining it. It's like, and yet it's still a regular textbook, which can be passed from person to person. And so there's it's as if there's this magical world behind the book. Regular paper, but there's all this stuff underneath. It's like, how many movies, children's movies begin with, once upon a time, and there's a book, and you open the book, and then the picture comes to life, and there's all this stuff underneath. But there's also fascinating stuff for the publisher here. As well, is that suitably anonymized, anyway, this data is incredibly valuable to publishers who can see which bits people are reading more, which chapters have the most questions about them, which order people are reading stuff in the newspaper, and so on and so forth. Perhaps which bits need revision, and I could talk for a long time about it. But it's immensely valuable data. Textbooks are a great example because textbooks are often sold multiple times. And the publisher only gets any money from the first one, but perhaps, for example, if there were an enhanced service that they could charge people for subscription to, then they get ongoing revenues from the sale of a book, all sorts of things. So The hope is that people will build plugins. There's an extension port on the back of this, so that it may be, you may have a Bluetooth thing, you may have extra storage, you may be able to plug other devices onto the end of this. And another reason in which this company is unusual is because the name of this at the moment is the O Pen. They're talking about this branding, it may change, but it's open. It's an open company in many ways. They've been blogging various aspects of their organization right from the start, very openly. When there have been problems and they've laid off people, that's been blogged too. Very honest, they're laying their soul bare there, and it'll be interesting to see how well that works in the long term. But at least people coming to the company really know what they're getting in for, and they don't come in with any nasty surprises. It's an open design in terms of many of the decisions about what they're doing have also been blogged about how they're building the scanner, how they're writing the software. The plan is actually to release the hardware under a fairly open license. When you get this thing, you'll probably get the pen, you'll probably get the schematics with it as well, so that we can make this stuff as open as possible. Exactly what license will be on that is interesting. We don't know yet. But the idea is that if this works, Exbiblio will be the portal. They will be the bridge, perhaps the toll bridge between the two sides of the chasm. So that's where the revenue for Exbiblio will come from, and it would be a very powerful position to be in. So is this paper 2.0? Well, I don't know. It may be that this is of value only in particular, very specific niches. It may be that this is only really valuable in the legal profession, or only really valuable for librarians. Or it may be that gradually this stuff is built into your phone, it's on your keyring, like your flash drive or your car fob. It may be that it becomes a completely new way of interacting with paper, that every paper document suddenly has a new life that it never had before, because paper has traditionally been the final sort of dead output stage of a huge amount of creative human activity and editing and electronic activity and so forth. And it ends up in paper form, which is lovely to read and good for storage, but is otherwise dead and interactive. And maybe this can bring paper back to life in some way. It may be the biggest thing since Gutenberg, who knows. But if we're successful, then the foundation that's associated with this will also be successful. And so hopefully, this company could change the world in more than just one way. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for one very concise question, and probably a fairly concise answer too. Please, yes.
Yes, sir.
Is it only going to work where there's a digital version of the book or article somewhere available on the internet? Is that right?
What it does essentially is it identifies the document that you scanned, because that phrase is a unique identifier of a document. Now, exactly what happens after that depends on what you want to do with it. So typically, yes, you will be interacting at that point. You've just got paper here. It's not printing on the paper. It's not doing anything else with the paper. But it is enabling you to link in some way to something about that document. It may be that that document does exist in full electronic form. But it may be for a whole variety of reasons that it doesn't. But nonetheless, when you scan that phrase, you can recognize that this is actually page 38 of the Clue Train Manifesto or something. And so you can still build a community around the fact that you're on page 38 of the Clue Train Manifesto, even if the whole of the text is not available online. So in general, yes, it's a link to the full text version, but it doesn't have to be. Basically, the 6 or so words is a unique identifier for that bit of that document. And what you may do may be simple document retrieval. You may say, I'd like a copy of this in my inbox, please. But it may be that actually it's not out there, or it's not out there yet. And this is an important thing, is that we may not be able to do anything with this yet, but if you've made the scan and it goes in your Life library, we keep refreshing that. And so if the thing you read is, the paper you read is not in Google now, but is in a month's time, your Life library gradually becomes more valuable over time. And as other people comment on that stuff or tag it or whatever, all of that stuff gets aggregated into your Life library, and so this thing grows, it becomes more valuable. It's as if other people can write their footnotes or fix the errata or whatever it may be. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dr.